toilets failing, air conditioning gone, food services disrupted. For 4 days, a U.S. Navy destroyer was left stranded in the sweltering South China Sea after a major power failure crippled the warship. No, we are not talking about USS Abraham Lincoln. This is happening thousands of kilometers away from Middle East and South China Sea, where U.S. Navy is facing yet another embarrassment. And now, the incident is raising fresh questions about the conditions facing American sailors at sea, as the USS Abraham Lincoln continues a record-setting deployment, with reports highlighting growing concerns over crew morale, living conditions, and mental health. From broken-down warships to exhausted crews, is the U.S. Navy pushing its sailors to the limit? USS Benfold, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, suffered what the Navy called an engineering casualty involving its generators on July 24th, while carrying out routine operations in the Indo-Pacific. The power failure knocked out several basic services aboard the nearly 10,000-ton warship, all while temperatures in the region climbed as high as 37 degrees Celsius. The destroyer eventually had to be towed to Subic Bay in the Philippines for repairs. As per the reports, power failure affected much more than the ship's ability to move. Navy Commander Matthew Comer, a spokesperson for the U.S. 7th Fleet, told a U.S. media network that the outage disrupted galley services, toilets, air conditioning, and potable water for sailors stuck aboard a warship in the tropical heat of the South China Sea. Losing air conditioning would have been difficult enough. But with normal food and sanitation services also disrupted, conditions became even tougher. The exact location of the incident was not disclosed, but the South China Sea typically experiences intense heat in late July, with daytime temperatures averaging between 89 and 98 degrees Fahrenheit, or 32 to 37 degrees Celsius. The Benfold remained without power for 4 days, and the ship was eventually towed to Philippines for repairs. The Navy says the crew was not left completely without food. The guided missile cruiser USS Robert Smalls provided cooked meals to the Benfold, while other ships from the Japan-based USS George Washington Carrier Strike Group also rushed to help. The destroyer was taken to Subic Bay for repairs, and the Navy said the work was completed on August 8th, after which the Benfold returned to duty. But the Benfold incident was not an isolated case. Back in May, another Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, the USS Higgins, lost power and propulsion for several hours while operating in the Indo-Pacific. A U.S. defense official told a media network at the time that the Higgins had suffered an engineering casualty in its electrical system. The Navy did not disclose the precise location of that incident either. And now, engineering failures are drawing attention because Arleigh Burke-class destroyers are among the most heavily relied upon warships in the U.S. Navy's surface fleet. More than 70 of these destroyers are currently in service. The roughly 500-foot-long warships can displace close to 10,000 tons and typically carry between 329 and 359 sailors, depending on their configuration. That makes the reliability of their engineering and electrical systems critical to keeping the Navy's operational tempo going. The United States is sending the aircraft carrier USS George Washington to the Middle East to replace the USS Abraham Lincoln, as growing concerns over crew morale and living conditions aboard the Lincoln raise questions about the toll of its unusually long deployment. But U.S. officials told a media network that the carrier swap is part of a previously planned rotation and is not a direct response to the concerns surrounding the Lincoln. The move comes as families and lawmakers have raised alarm over reports of severe burnout and deteriorating living conditions aboard the Lincoln after more than 250 days at sea. There have also been reports of multiple sailors attempting to go overboard, with at least one sailor reportedly stopped by another crew member. The roughly 5,000 sailors and Marines aboard the nuclear-powered carrier left San Diego on November 21st for what was initially planned as a Pacific deployment. But that mission changed after the U.S. war with Iran began on February 28th, when the carrier was redirected to the Middle East. According to lawmakers, the Lincoln has now spent more than 200 consecutive days without a port call, putting the crew and the Navy's ability to sustain such prolonged operations to an extraordinary test. Families have described growing psychological strain among sailors, including concerns over suicidal thoughts and reported attempts to jump overboard. At a tense meeting in San Diego attended by around 200 relatives, families confronted acting Navy Secretary Hung Chow and senior commanders over the deployment and the uncertainty surrounding when the crew would return home. The U.S. Navy, however, has pushed back against claims of a worsening mental health crisis aboard the Lincoln. The service says it has not identified an increase in reported suicidal thoughts or suicide attempts on the carrier. The Navy also says sailors have access to counselors and chaplains, along with clean water and healthy meals. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has also rejected reports of poor conditions aboard the ship, calling them completely misrepresented.
Members of U.S. service members are concerned about the conditions on board the USS Lincoln.
Well, no, that ship is moving. No, they're not. That ship is moving right now, or very shortly, and it's being replaced with another very similar ship.
Has the deployment's gone on too long?
No. Not nearly long enough. Thank you, everybody.
The Navy has acknowledged, however, that the war disrupted traditional supply hubs in the Middle East, contributing to shortages and delays involving food, hygiene supplies, and mail. Now, the USS George Washington and its accompanying strike group are heading toward the region as the United States maintains a major naval presence amid the conflict with Iran and continuing tensions around the Strait of Hormuz. The United States and Iran were locked in a rapidly escalating confrontation in early 2026, with tensions finally spilling into open war on February 28th, when the U.S. and Israel launched major airstrikes on Iran. The strikes targeted Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile infrastructure and aimed to weaken its military capabilities and leadership. Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed in the opening strikes. Tehran quickly hit back with missile and drone attacks targeting Israel, U.S. military positions, and sites across the Middle East. Iran also moved to shut the strategically important Strait of Hormuz, taking the conflict far beyond the immediate U.S.-Iran confrontation and putting a major global energy route at risk. For more than 3 months, the fighting continued, with waves of missile strikes, air attacks, and retaliatory operations. Gulf states were increasingly caught in the middle as Iranian attacks and the wider regional conflict threatened U.S. bases, energy infrastructure, and maritime traffic. By June, however, Washington and Tehran began looking for a way out. After negotiations involving regional mediators, the two sides reached an interim framework aimed at stopping the fighting and creating room for talks on Iran's nuclear program, sanctions, and wider regional security. In June, the U.S. and Iran signed the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding. The deal called for an immediate halt to military operations and barred both sides from launching further attacks against each other. It also provided for a 60-day ceasefire, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, and steps to ease economic pressure on Iran, including measures related to oil exports and the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports. The ceasefire sharply reduced direct U.S.-Iran attacks and was meant to serve as a bridge toward a lasting peace agreement. But the underlying disputes over Iran's nuclear and missile programs, sanctions, and regional security remained unresolved, and the truce soon began to show cracks. Washington and Tehran continued to disagree over the memorandum, particularly on the Strait of Hormuz, sanctions, and the U.S. naval blockade. By August, the 60-day diplomatic window had effectively broken down. The U.S. said it would not extend the ceasefire, while Iran accused Washington of failing to honor its commitments. Tehran has since warned that it could adopt a more offensive military posture if diplomacy fails.